Okay, welcome to the Territorial Prison, Arizona's first gated community. My name's Smokey, and I'll be taking you around the yard, showing you some of the cells and things, and give you a little history on the construction of the place, and some of the wild stories that happened here in the prison. And some of what I'm telling you is actually true. Okay, before we get started, I got a couple of modern day announcements. The restrooms are at that end of the building. The drinking fountain here by the door. When you're out in the yard, there's some loose gravel and rocks and stuff, so be real careful walking around. Some tripping hazards. When you leave today, if you're one of those lucky enough to get out of here, make sure you get up in the tank tower. Good photo ops in all directions up there. If you go to the southeast corner, you can look straight down and see an actual piece of the old wall, what's left of it, where it went from the sally port out to that point, and then it turned and went directly south through what is now the parking lot. And he gives you a better idea of the size of the complex back in the day. Okay, Arizona in the 19th century is pretty wild place, pretty wide open. We did have a lot of silver mines and gold mines back then, and the railroad was yet to be a presence here, so all the bullion and cash for payroll and supplies and what have you, that was all being transported across open, deserted, empty desert in wagons and stagecoaches. And if you got a wagon load of gold bars going across the deserted desert, it's a pretty good temptation for those less inclined to work for a living. So we had our share of bad guys. Now our little tiny towns like Phoenix and 268 territorial legislators, my friends, politicians, they said, we need a territorial penitentiary. So they sat down in their political wisdom and they drafted a bill for the creation of the territorial Yuma, the Arizona Territorial Prison, to be located in Phoenix. Now they worked long and hard on this project and they thought they had everything covered. They only forgot one minor detail, as politicians will do. They didn't have any money to get started. So their great plan got tabled. Now, in 1875, things were beginning to escalate a little bit, and they said, we really got to do something now. And they had $25,000 this time of your money to get started. So they got their bill out of mothballs and they dusted it off and changed the date on the top and went, that was a lot of work, man. Let's go to lunch. Politicians, right? So they all bailed out and went to lunch, except for that gentleman on the wall, Jose Redondo, and another man by the name of Randolph B. Kelly. They were our Yuma representatives. And they said, tell you what, guys, we had late breakfast. You go ahead and go to lunch. We're going to reread this bill one more time. And they went down through the bill and they came to where it said the destination was Phoenix. Hey, no problem. They scratched it out, wrote Yuma all to the top. That's what we did. So the boys came back from lunch. The politicians' lunch was probably liquid. And they said, man, we worked so hard today, let's just sign that stupid bill and go home, which is what they did. And it went to the governor and he accepted it as presented. Guess what? Prison's coming to you. True story. That's what you wanted to know. Okay, we're going to step outside and get into the construction of some of our more interesting residents. It's a great day to go to prison, guys. Today you can either stand in the shade or stand in the sun. You wouldn't want to exercise that option in July. Might be a little uncomfortable. Okay, the prison was constructed in 1876 and it was built by the inmates that were going to occupy it. You guys are okay in the back? Okay. Sometimes I wonder about this. Pretty good deal if you can get somebody to build their own jail, right? Anyway. They worked on this dutifully, and on July 2nd, 1876, the prison was finished, and they marched 7 inmates up the hill to take up residence. At the time, the prison consisted of only 2 cells, and there was an adobe building somewhere here where we're standing that had bars on the windows and some anchor rings on the floor. That was the whole prison at the time. No walls or fences yet. Boys had to either stay in the cells or be very carefully guarded. Now, the Hollywood and the pulp novel depiction, of course, of the territorial prison is the hellhole. Oh man, terrible, terrible place. Of course, it wasn't really comfy, but they talk about all the punishments, terrible punishments, starvation diets, and of course the heat. Everybody whines about the heat. In actuality, the prison was pretty much a model institution as far as prisons go for the time. You gotta remember the time, guy. This is 1870. There's no electricity in Arizona, period. Yuma's a little frontier town, adobe houses, arrowweed roofs, no heat, no air, no running water, no indoor facilities. Pretty primitive. But the prison here, during its 33 years of continuous construction, we got electricity. It was the first in the whole territory in 1885. They had forced air ventilation in all the cells. They had a big air pump out there that would blow air down through the cell block and keep the air moving in the cells. Supposed to cool it off in there 10 degrees or so, which sounds pretty humane until you remember you're in Yuma. It's 125 out here. That makes it 115 in your bedroom. Might be a little uncomfy. They had a bathhouse that they were required to use once a week. And when we move over here to the cells, you look in number 1 over there. There's 3 guys sitting in there looking back at you. You keep in mind that the cells are designed for 6. So you stuff 3 more guys in there and consider maybe once a week wasn't quite enough. However, they did have a bathhouse. Now, they had flush toilets. Unheard of in the 1870s. Nobody had flush toilets. They had a flush toilet system. It was actually called the Parsons Trough. I don't know where they came up with that one. But, and the effluent, what do you suppose they did with the effluent? They piped it out and dumped it in the Colorado River, of course. That was totally acceptable, except for one minor detail. It was just right above the intake for the town of Yuma. That did cause a bone of contention for a couple of years, until they finally dug a trench and laid a pipeline all the way from here to the west side of Yuma, where they tunneled underneath the railroad hotel and then dumped it in the river. Then everybody was happy. Anyway, all but the worst guys got out of their cells every day to walk around in the yard once they got some walls put up where nobody could stray. They worked 5 days a week. They quarried all of this granite. This all came from up here on the hill, and made adobes, like you see on the dining hall behind you, and continually improved their wonderful prison home. Saturdays were for doctor visits, haircuts, the blacksmith / barber, or dentist, excuse me, the blacksmith, he wasn't a dentist. He had the tongs. Sundays they actually had a day of rest, and they got religious services in 2 denominations and 2 languages, which was pretty cool. So people in Yuma looked up here, saw the bright lights, and they heard about these toilet things, and they said, man, that's the country club on the Colorado. That's what they called it. They said, I want to be a prisoner. They got it made. But nobody had any misconception that it was a prisoner, because the club members couldn't leave. And there are a lot of nasty characters in here, murderers, rapists, thieves, people of even lower moral depravity like politicians and attorneys. Okay, move over here to the VIP suites. Check the side. This is the more minimum security side over here. This is where we kept the nice murderers over here. And if you look at this set of doors here as you come by, they're in their original configuration. Most of these had parts scavenged out of them. But here you have 2 doors connected by 2 iron bars that work in conjunction with each other. The idea being, if you have 5 guys in here and you want one of them out, it's pretty difficult for the rest of them to rush you while you're maneuvering these doors. It's also an extra added layer of security. Now this cell over here is our John Wayne cell. John Wayne was in cliffhanger it was. Anyway, he got thrown in here by the bad guys. Luckily for him, his pals, the 3 Musketeers, came and rescued him in the nick of time. Mr. Lopez is a study in Mexican justice back in the day. He was in our prison twice for grand larceny. Both times he was in here, he bragged to anybody that would listen to him about the 19 guys he killed here and in Mexico. Well, he got out of here after finishing his 2nd term, and he was in Bisbee, which, if you know, is down that border. 6 of them were successful, mostly from outside the walls. Now, from prisoner transport, work crews, and the like, such things. 2 guys, however, they made a grappling hook in the blacksmith shop, and one night they went over the wall of the east yard, right past sleeping guard Harry McFall, who was dealt with later, and they skittered off down to Mexico. They made it their home free. Well, not quite free, because as soon as they got to Mexico, they were immediately conscripted into the Mexican army for life. And it's not a very pleasant occupation. They got word back about a year later. They wish they'd have stayed in prison. Food's a lot better, and at least you get out someday. Now, there was quite a few escape attempts by violence. The most notorious was the Gates riot, and I won't tell you the whole story, it takes too long, but in a nutshell, 7 inmates took the superintendent hostage, and they got through the Sally Port, where 4 of them were immediately shot and killed, and another one wounded, and the superintendent received a terrific debilitating neck wound with a big long knife. Another inmate came to his aid, and they stopped the escape attempt. If you're interested in the particulars, we can go out, and after the yard tour, I'll show you exactly where it happened, tell you who was responsible, and the whole story. It takes another 10 minutes or so I don't like to do it on the yard tour. Now, every time an inmate left the prison, it cost the citizen money. If the guy was pardoned, he was given a suit of clothes not to exceed $20 in value and a $5 bill to take him as far as $5 would take him, which was generally the first saloon. Anyway, if he died, a wooden casket to bury him across the street was $25. That had to be paid for. Now, if he escaped, our Indian trackers, or trailers they were called, were given $50 to go and catch him, track him down, catch him, and bring him back, dead or alive. Prison authorities didn't care. But the Cachan Indian trackers were pretty smart. If they brought him back dead, they had to carry his body, and if he came back alive, he came under his own power, right? So they brought him back alive. Also, if he came back alive, he might escape again. They'd get another $50. Pretty smart guys. Okay, we're going to go out and head down to the women's ward, but I got one more little story I want to tell you. Most of the guys in here, and the gals too, for that matter, of course, were pretty nasty characters, which one might imagine since they were in prison. But some of them were a little more benign. We had some forgers and embezzlers and stuff like that. And some of them, if you want to look at it in a different light, were kind of comical when it gets right down to it. They had no business trying to be a criminal. Anyway, William Hall in 1875, before the prison, he murdered a couple of guys on the east side for their horses. They caught him, threw him into Pima County Jail, which he immediately escaped from. Ran off down to Mexico. They found him 6 months later down in Magdalena. They grabbed him, brought him back again. This time they put him in the Yuma County Jail. That one took him a couple of weeks to dig out of there. Got out of there, headed for Mexico again. This time they got him before he even hit the border. And when they brought him back this time, they adorned him with some jewelry that would slow that in the future. However, now we're building a prison. So he's one of the guys that helped build the prison. And being instrumental in setting the cornerstone, the prison authorities said, William Hall, we are going to bestow on you an honor that has never been done before. You get to be prisoner number 1 in our brand new penitentiary. That's such a deal, huh? Well, he gets out in 1884. He's walking out, and William Mallow is just coming in, soon to be number 247. He's doing 2 years for robbery. And Mr. Mallow says, hey, bud, I'm not going to need these civilian clothes where I'm going. I'm pretty sure they're going to fix me up when I get inside with some stripes. Would you like to have them? And William Hall said, well, yeah, that's big of you. So he got nice cities to wear out into the world, start his life anew. Well, he's out for 2 years, and he steals a cow and a pig. Guess what? Here he comes again, back to the zoo. Now he's number 414. As he's coming in, give you 2 guesses who's going out. It's a true story. There's a direct quote from William Hall. He says, well, bud, one good turn deserves another. And he gave Mr. Mallow a nice set of tweeds to wear out into the world. So he's in for 2 years for his cow and his pig. He gets out. A year later, he steals a horse. Here he comes again. Now he's number 581. And as he was coming up the hill, he was singing, there's no place like home. I guess he learned his lesson because he never came back. Okay, we'll go down to the women's ward and then work our way back by the dark cell and the insane zone. Before the railroad came through here in 1924, this wall was 100 feet further west, of course, and it was 18 feet tall. So the yard was a lot larger. So we had the whole period here, most of the time, only 1 or 2 at a time. Not a great bunch of them in here. Most in here was 6, and that was in 1909, right before they closed. Now you gals were more trouble, more bother, and more worry than all the other murderers that were in here. Poor superintendent pulled his hair out because we didn't have facilities for women. When they built the prison, they thought, women in a prison? Boy, did you fool them. Anyway, they didn't know what to do with this occasional female that would come in on a sentence. So they put her in the guards' quarters, or they put her in the superintendent's house, or put her in solitary, anywhere to keep her away from 200 guys that hadn't seen a woman for a couple of years. Anyway, finally in 1993, they built the women's quarters here. Now that little fence was about 10, 12 feet high and 30 feet long, and inside that was the women's yard. And you would walk through this door, turn to your right, and walk out of another door, and you'd be in the yard. And then dug back into the hill here, there was 3 cells, which was the women's cells. And I went across the road here about 5 years ago, took a picture back this way, and that's what's left of the cells. You can see the three caves there. Now, in 1897, John Dorrington was the superintendent here, and Dorrington was a gentleman and very humane, very nice guy. And he said, you know, these women are criminals, but they're still ladies, and they're living in a cave. He says, this is barbaric. I won't have it. I have he told the Board of Control, I have a 2-story guardhouse that I'm not using, and I want to put cells upstairs for the women and a workroom downstairs where they can make their clothes, because you see they didn't have to wear the stripes. They were allowed to make some clothes. And I want a matron. Tired of my assistant superintendent trying to take these women to the bathhouse. It's highly embarrassing. So Board of Control said, hey, great idea. He had 3 gals in here then, Maria Moreno, Teresa Garcia, and Trinidad Montano. And he was expecting the 4th one, and she said more was supposed to be coming in. 4 kind of tripping hazards. Big cage in the middle of the floor. You can circle around to the right or the left. Plenty of room around there. I've got a little flashlight. You can use your cell lights. They work just fine. Probably a good idea not to point them up because it irritates our bats. You guys can go to the left also. There's plenty of room over there. Come on around. We've had 50 people in here, so it'll fit. So this was solitary, the dark cell, the snake den. It had many, many names. This cage is an exact replica of what the original one was. In fact, this is the original floor of the old cage. So if you were over about 4'6", you couldn't stand up during the time in here. So this was the worst form of punishment they ever had at the prison. There was no beating or whipping like you see in the movies. But the guy was brought in here and chained inside this cage, and he had a bucket of water down here and a bucket to get rid of it down there. And that inner door was not an iron grate like it is. It was a solid wood door, so when it was closed, it was completely black in here. No light got in at all. The only air came through that little vent hole up there in the ceiling. That was your air supply. In 1892, John Clay came into the prison as number 830. And before long, he insulted one of the guards, so that's insubordination. He got 8 days here in the dark cell. He got out of there, and in the fall of 93, he tried to kill another prisoner, Howard Withrow, number 633. Clay slit his throat with a shoemaker's knife. He got out of one of the shops. So November 15th, he was back here in solitary. December 31st, Superintendent Gates' report says, well, Howard Withrow has recovered from his injuries. He's back at work in the shops. And John Clay's still in solitary, and he refuses to be contrite. So that was 56 days and nights in here. Then in February, the local newspaper said, well, February 18th, John Clay was finally released from the solitary cell, and he promises to be a good boy. That was 104 days and nights in here, which ended up to be a record for consecutive days and nights anyway. And he didn't learn much because within a month he got caught gambling, so he's back in here for another 5. That summer he got a day for refusing to shave and 6 days for refusing to go to work. Fall of 95, he tried to escape with 3 other guys, got caught. We got 11 more days back in here. And in the spring of 95, tried to escape again, got caught again. This time he did 28 more days. So he did 164 days altogether in here. In 4.5 years in the prison, he spent almost 6 months of it sitting in here in the dark with the bugs and the mice. He's a stubborn kid. He was 22 years old. We had 2 women in here, Rosa Duran and Elena Estrada. They got in a little cat fight over there in their cell, so the guards brought them in here and they chained them together for a couple of days. They worked out their differences. They called it the snake den because one time a bunch of ladies came up here to inspect the prison, and the superintendent said, when these gals are going around, I want everything really, really clean. So everybody was cleaning everything up. And they brought the ladies in here to see the dark cell. Well, there was a guy, a trustee up there on the roof, brooming out that vent vigorously with a broom that hadn't been cleaned out for a few months. And a couple of great big fat spiders came plop, plop on the floor and ran towards these gals. And didn't take them long to get out of here, you can bet on that. However, by the time they got back out to the sally port, talking amongst themselves, it had become thousands of spiders and scorpions pouring out of the hole. And then when they got down to Yuma to recount their adventures to their friends, somehow the place had become filled with writhing snakes. So it became the snake den ever after that. I don't think there was ever a snake. I don't know what a snake would be doing in here. Okay, if we go back out, turn right, there's a little white door out there. That's the insane cell.
Were there mattresses on the floor in here?
No, indeed.
That's just how it
That's it. What you see is what you get. Shouldn't be too comfy.
Did they have more than one prisoner in here?
The most ever in here was 14. That was after the Lostino riot in 1904. They chained them around the outside and around the inside.
So you're telling me they slept on these?
What if they wanted to sleep? It might have been concrete.
How possible is to sleep on these?
It might have been concrete, but it certainly wasn't a bed.
Humans are evil, huh? Wow, that's impossible. Look at this. This is like a cage.
Anyway, that's where they put those guys who could be a harm to themselves or others. And not to be confused with the modern day pad itself. The walls in there are just like the walls in there. You ought to be the difference in the wall in there. Anyway, there was a occasion down there for an inmate and they put it in here for a while. If you acted crazy enough and you could fool a doctor, they would send him to an insane asylum. A lot easier to get out. You know, maybe this guy's pulling us tricky here. So they watch him real close. And finally the doctor said, put him back in prison. So as soon as he got over here, he starts going at it again. And eventually he died here in 1892. He died in the prison. And they did an autopsy on him, and he had a huge tumor growing on his brain. So, poor guy was insane, but they didn't have any way of telling that back in the day, or any way of doing anything about it if they had. So, that was the breaks. Okay, we'll move down here to the library. Good place to sit if you want to sit for a minute. This is one of our later